Morning, everybody. It's good to see you. Thanks for being here for this time of Bible study. I keep repeating when I get up here to teach Bible class, we usually teach from down there, and I feel like it encourages class participation more when we teach from down there. But because we're using the computer projection for the verses on this Romans study, I'm teaching from up here. But I don't want it to discourage class participation. So if you have a question or comment, by all means, let me know so we can include that as we study together through the book of Romans, verse by verse, an old-fashioned verse-by-verse study. We don't do that all the time, but it's certainly valuable. Romans is a tough book. As I told you when we introduced the book, I think Romans may, in my opinion, may be the most difficult book in the New Testament. But we can make sense of it. I believe God has given us a revelation that we can understand. And I think one of the great rules of Bible study is let plainer statements help us understand the more difficult ones. We're going to come to some difficult statements in the book of Romans. But whatever meaning we attach to that cannot contradict other verses that are plain and easily understood. So I think that we need to always approach our study in that fashion. All right. We looked at these verses already, so we're not going to go over them again, but I just want to use these to introduce the next paragraph. Notice, Paul said he felt as a debtor to preach the gospel. He said, I am ready to preach the gospel to you that are at Rome. So that's the saying, I am ready to preach the gospel, specifically to you at Rome. Why was Paul ready to preach the gospel? Well, he gives several reasons. For, here the word for means because, right? I'm ready to preach the gospel because I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, right? It's the power of God to salvation to everyone that believeth, the Jew first and also the Greek. So he was ready to preach because he wasn't ashamed of the gospel. Also, for, verse 17, for the righteousness of God, for therein is the righteousness of God revealed. And so to be right with God, it's revealed in the gospel. The reason I'm ready to preach the gospel, I'm not ashamed of it, and in it the righteousness of God is revealed. And so then that leads us to the section that we want to dive into deeper this morning. But here's that word again, for. So this links it back. Do you see what I'm saying? He said, I'm ready to preach the gospel. Because I'm not ashamed of it, because the righteousness of God is revealed in it, and because why? Well, here's another reason why. So he lists several reasons why. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Okay, so another reason why Paul was ready to preach was because the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. One of the reasons he was ready to preach is because he understood the concept of God's wrath. And people need to be warned about the wrath of God. That would still be true of our preaching today as well. The wrath of God is a thing that's greatly overlooked in our world. Even in most religious circles, people don't want to talk about the wrath of God, the judgment of God, and punishing evildoers. The emphasis is all about love, the love of God. Well, God's certainly a loving God, but that's not the full picture of God. And part of the accurate picture of God is that he's a God of justice and judgment, and that he is a God of wrath against those who do. Notice, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. If you don't get that picture, if you don't see that, then you're not really seeing God like he totally is. I thought this was kind of an interesting expression here in verse 18. It says, who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Now that expression, obviously here I'm using the King James on these charts, but that word hold there doesn't really mean what we would think. Somebody holds the truth. Well, that means they cherish it or they value it. That's not the meaning here. This word is, this would be better translated, they hold it down. Or I think a lot of newer translators, the New American Standard and English Standard for sure use the word suppress. That's the meaning of hold here. These people, God is angry. The wrath of God is revealed against ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in their unrighteousness. And so these are people who are working against God. They're trying to hold down the truth, suppress it, keep it from being announced and proclaimed freely. Are there any people like that in the world today? Absolutely there are, right? There are plenty of them. Sadly, there seem to be an increasing amount of people who are in that category, who are trying to suppress the truth of God. Just in a few verses down here, we're going to talk about the horrible sin of homosexuality. That's a sin that is classically an illustration of men trying to suppress God's truth in our world today, right? Unrighteous men are trying to suppress the truth of God against the sin of homosexuality. So the situation hasn't changed terribly, right? And Paul said, I'm ready to preach the gospel because people need to know about the wrath of God against ungodliness and unrighteous men who are trying to suppress truth, right? So Paul's working to announce God's truth. There are unrighteous men who are trying to suppress God's truth. And that made it all the more urgent for him to be active in proclaiming the gospel of Christ. I would argue that the same thing is true for us. We live in a world where men are trying to suppress God's truth, and it makes all the more urgent for us to be proclaiming His message to the world. Thoughts or comments here, anybody? Tom, do you have a thought?
A lot of people that take and claim to be righteous but still trying to suppress the truth. They will go through and present, I have a new revelation. So that circumvents, what the Word of God has to say. John addressed that in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John to a lot of those that, said that they had a better revelation. They had something new to add.
The Gnostics, they knew better.
Yeah. And we have that too. And in that aspect, they claim to be righteous, not unrighteous. But God identifies them as unrighteous if they're suppressing the truth.
Those who suppress truth are unrighteous people. Exactly right. Anybody else have a thought? All right. He says, now here's what's really wrong with these people, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. God has showed it to them. So something is manifest. To make manifest is to simply make known or make evident, right? What may be known of God is manifest in them. God has showed it to them. And then he's going to explain how God has showed. In other words, these people are not being logical. They're trying to suppress God's truth when the fact of the matter is they should know better. God, that which may be known of God is manifest in them. God has showed it to them. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead. So let's stop right there. It's really inexcusable for people to suppress the truth about God because God has made it so obvious. God has made it manifest. God's an invisible being, right? You can't see God. You can't experience God with your five senses. But God has still clearly made Himself known. Notice, He is understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead. What Paul is describing here is what a lot of times we talk about. Look around. Just look around and look at the things that exist in nature. Look at the physical creation that we live in. If you look at our immediate planet Earth, if you look right here in our own, beautiful state of Tennessee, you see God's creation right here in our locality. But if you go beyond that, talk about the Earth at large. Go beyond the Earth, talk about our solar system. Go beyond our solar system, talk about our galaxy. Go beyond our galaxy, talk about the vast, enormously vast universe. I was listening to a guy the other day who says, we used to say, of course we live in the Milky Way galaxy, right? They used to say that they believed there were billions of galaxies like our Milky Way. So there's billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. They used to say there were billions of other galaxies. Now they're saying there's likely trillions of other galaxies that all contain billions plus stars. I mean, the numbers of the vastness of the physical universe is just beyond our pea brains to comprehend. We cannot grasp the enormity of the universe that God spoke into existence, all right? If you look at that, if you look at God's physical creation and say, I don't believe in God. I don't think there's a God. I don't believe this. You guys are claiming God. You're trying to preach a creator, God. I don't believe that. I deny it. What am I doing? Well, I am holding down, I am suppressing the truth, and it's inexcusable because all you have to do is look around and you see the evidence of God's existence. Now, we'll talk here in a minute, but if we didn't have the Bible, if we didn't have God's specific revelation, we would still have to conclude that there is such a being. There must be such a being. There must be an all-powerful being out there who could create the things that we see. I don't know who he is. I don't know anything about him. I wonder who he is. I wonder what he wants from me. I wonder what I should do in response to him. I don't know him, but I know he must exist. That would be our reality if there was no Bible. But of course, we are so blessed because God has revealed himself to us specifically in his word. And so not only can we look at creation and know that he exists, we can look at our Bible and find out what he wants us to do. Now Paul's not dealing with that right here. But he's saying that if you can look around, God, this is evident, this is manifest, this is, you don't have to think very hard to come to this reasonable conclusion that there is this supreme being. These things, he is invisible, but he has made things that are clearly seen. The things that are made are clearly seen. We can't see him, but we can see the things he made. Dan?
I think the real conspiracy theories for people that actually don't believe that they see all this evidence before them and they still choose not to believe.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You're right about the vastness of the universe. I think it's much greater than that.
Yeah, we don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, they focused in the telescope is a grain of sand, and behind that grain of sand, what they focused in at was still more trillions of stars. But it's insane, and I think they're the ones that are conspiracy theories because how would you just not believe that God created all this?
Exactly right. Is it?
I
I think you're right. So I think the key thing you mentioned is denying the evidence. The evidence is there, and you're denying it. Then there's if you do that, and here's the expression that I really think is key right here. Anybody who does that is without excuse. You look at creation and you deny God, there is no excuse for that. Another word, and some other English translations will use the word, it's indefensible, cannot be defended. This is let me get rid of some of these scribbles here real quickly. This word, without excuse. We don't know a lot of Greek, right? But we know some Greek. And one of the Greek words we know is apologia. apology, to make an apology. Sometimes we talk about apologetics. The study of apologetics is the study of evidences, right? Evidence for the existence of God, evidence that the Bible is His inspired word, evidence that Jesus Christ is our resurrected Savior. The study of evidence is sometimes referred to as apologetics. Now, we use the word apology to say, let me apologize to you, I'm so sorry. You know, that's how we use the word apology. That's not the Greek word apologia. The word apologia, or the study of apologetics, is the study of evidences, and it means literally to make a defense. Look in 1 Peter chapter 3. In 1 Peter chapter 3, you know well, verse 15. Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. To give an answer, that's apologia. That's the Greek word apologia. And really it's more than just give an answer. It's actually the idea of make a defense. This verse tells us, be ready to make a defense of the hope that is in you. In other words, you're explaining why, and you're giving the evidence why you have that hope. So apologia is to make a defense. So here, this expression puts the negative prefix in front of apologia. This is that same root, apologia, but it has a negative prefix in front of apologia. The prefix is an apologia. And so I think this is kind of interesting. You can make a defense for the existence of God. To argue that there is no God is without defense. There's no argument that you could make. There's no way that you could defend that position to say that there is no God, okay? So I thought that was kind of interesting. We're familiar with 1 Peter 3:15 that uses the word apologia, make a defense, give an answer. This is the opposite of this. Because they put that negative prefix in front of it, this is actually the opposite of that. You can't defend that. There is no defense for that, okay? Look at creation, say there's no God. There's no way to defend that. Anybody, thought or comment?
So many of our college or universities are just filling up the students' heads full of there is no God.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous anymore.
Well, yes, I think you're exactly right. And the problem with it is they're so prejudicial in the way they present it. You're just an ignorant buffoon to believe in God. We are the intellectual elites. We know better. Foolish people, ignorant, superstitious people like you believe in God. But we are enlightened. We know better. We are the intellectual elites. And what happens is kids come away from that. They're indoctrinated with that. And they come away with that thinking that us Bible believers are ignorant, stupid, superstitious. But their college professors are smart. They're brilliant. And if they believe there is no God, then that must be what's right and you're wrong. That's the takeaway. Mike?
Well, you know, and to the Jews, this is just a stumbling block, but to the Greeks, it is just a bunch of foolishness. And the Greeks were the intellect of the day. So the intellect out here, what we're doing in here is just a bunch of foolishness.
Unfortunately. And so that situation hadn't really changed, has it?
No, it hasn't.
Yeah. Tom?
Just that little phrase of being understood by the things that are made is, has a lot of scientific principles based on it. We go through and a lot of our evolutional theory people try to keep adding time to things to get things because they can't explain things happening the way it does. But a lot of our theories of physics and matter and all those things, go back to saying that there is a creator, there is somebody that put this into motion, there is something that happened. And I think that's what Paul's sort of revealing here through the book of Revelation. He's saying the invisible things of God, that power that works on things is seen in the things that he made.
Yeah.
And if you go back and you study the things that are made, the conclusion is there had to be somebody that made them.
Exactly.
And most theorists in like evolution and other types of things like that don't want to accept that. They want to go through and try to explain these things without God, but they can't.
They want to get God out of
the point.
Yeah, they want to get God out of the picture so badly, right? Because, and it really, if you think about it, they need to get God out of the picture, because if they acknowledge God, if there is a God, then I need to be doing something. If there is a God, then I need to be accountable to God. And so they got to get rid of God, right? But they are, you know, I think the theory of course, the theory of evolution hinges around the desire to deny God. But the theory of evolution doesn't work. And even scientists are beginning to acknowledge, you know, the theory of evolution is it just doesn't work. It's anti-scientific. It certainly doesn't explain what we see in the physical universe. So I think, and I don't think it'll happen maybe in those of us who are old. It might not happen in our lifetime, but it might happen in the lifetime of some of the younger kids here. I think they're going to abandon the theory of evolution. I really predict that, because it doesn't work. And it is, as I said, against or anti-scientific. It goes against the basic laws of science. I don't think they're going to come around to believing in God. And I've seen some hints already as the direction I think they're heading. Richard Dawkins, for instance, who's a famous British scientist and atheist, Richard Dawkins has speculated that we were colonized here by space aliens. Aliens from other places in the universe planted us here. That's how we got here. Not God. Of course, that doesn't really solve the problem. That just moves it back one step. You know, so where'd the aliens come from? You know, actually, we acknowledge what I like to refer to as an uncaused first cause. The uncaused first cause is God, right? Everybody has to have an uncaused first cause. We acknowledge God. The evolutionist does not want to acknowledge God, but they got to come up with something, so maybe they're going to come up with space aliens. That doesn't solve their problem, but I think that's the direction they're heading. JD?
Yeah, I was going to bring up the uncaused first cause and say that this discussion always has to go back to that. And to Dan's point earlier, if you really want to start hearing crazy theories, you know, even for somebody who doesn't believe in God, the idea that there is an all-powerful being who spoke everything into existence, there's a whole lot less of a leap, in my opinion, for someone to believe that than if you truly understood the crazy thread of things, that there was an amoeba and it did this and then that happened and then this happened and then there was a boom and then there was that. I mean, you talk about a leap of faith to believe something that crazy.
I agree completely. And I think we've said, you know, it would take more faith to believe in evolution than to believe in creation by far. I believe you're exactly right, Tom.
You know, even that concept of being supplanted by aliens, you're in that theory, you're recognizing there's a more intelligent life form out there than we are to do that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, why would you do that and not look at, you know, God as being that, you know, terrestrial, you know, non-terrestrial being that came through and do it? It follows that same concept of an intellectual being that's presenting that, but you don't want to accept the one that we have evidence to prove. You want to accept something that we can't prove.
Exactly. Anybody else? Mike?
You know, there's a lot of people in this world, they're just as bad a shape as somebody that doesn't believe in God that does believe in God. There's a lot of people who believe in God, but they're serving a strange God. And it's like Cain, when he offered up a sacrifice unto God, it wasn't acceptable to God. So that's happening in the world today too. So if you believe in God, but if you're not having the true God and the true faith, then you're just as bad off as somebody that doesn't believe in God.
Okay.
That's kind of what we'll get into in a minute. God made man logical to understand something else is larger than us. And we'll see later on that he's going to recognize that, but he's not going to give God the glory. He's going to make these other images and give it the glory for ourselves, man.
Yeah.
Right? So, God made us logical and will understand something greater than us, but it's the problem is they're not going to give Him the glory when they should have. They're going to give somebody else the glory.
Exactly. Let's take those next verses, James. So they see the evidence of God in creation, but they won't acknowledge Him. It's an inexcusable, indefensible position. But what they've done, as James pointed out, when they knew God, they glorified Him not. In other words, they knew God. They knew there must be something. They knew there must be such a being. But they glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man and to birds and to four-footed beasts and creeping things. You know, one of the things that has been, in fact, we use it as one of our arguments for the existence of God, that human being, this is called the cosmological argument for the existence of God. One of the things that is true of men is a desire to worship something higher. And that has been evidenced in all societies and cultures that have ever been discovered. You know, I think most remote cultures have pretty well been discovered in our day and time, but through the course of time, as men discovered new civilizations of people, new cultures of people, they were always worshiping. They were worshiping something. And interestingly, the oldest tradition, if you trace that back as far back as it goes, the oldest tradition of worship was always of a single being, not multiple gods, but a single God. There has always been that. And so, you know, a dog doesn't have a desire to worship, you know. A cow has no inclination to worship. Human beings have an inclination to worship. How is that so? How is that so? Well, and we're going to see more of this in chapter 2, but I think it's an inherent nature that God put into man, and He didn't put it into anything else in His creation. Yeah. Give man the same. And let us make man in our image. Yeah. In Genesis 1, exactly right. God made us in His image, nothing else in His image. And that's talking about the spiritual part of us. Mike.
God, He's revealed Himself through these miracles of old time. He's revealed Himself to man through
Lots
all
of
these
ways.
miracles all the way back to the beginning of time.
Exactly right. Lots of ways. Bob, did you have a thought?
Oh, I was going to ask where the aliens come from.
That's it. That doesn't solve their problem, does it? Just moves it back one step. Yeah. All right. Whit.
I was talking with somebody who, I wouldn't call them atheists, but they don't have very strong belief in really anything. And they were just asking some questions, and I said, well, I just came to the logical conclusion that sheep and human beings had to have been created within a couple of days of each other, because if there were no men to keep the sheep, they cannot survive in the wild on their own. So they would have lasted one generation in the wild for a sheep. There would be no sheep here today.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. There's so much about their view that's just illogical. It doesn't work. And I like to use the expression anti-scientific. It goes against everything we know in science and nature. James?
You can kind of compare this chapter to Acts 17. He's speaking to the Athenians regarding knowledge and great things. And he goes through the same kind of explanation to non-believers. He's talking to Christians here, obviously. And he noted in there that, you know, God made man that they might grow for Him, that they might find Him, to seek Him.
Yeah.
So the logical aspect of it, whether they do it or not. I mean, He's given the evidence to them. He's made that imperative because of logical. Find Him. And now He's given them extra. So there's not an excuse. He's given them that initiation to try to move towards Him. Now He's given the gospel. And these other things, miracles and
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
There's no more excuse, right? More times of ignorance. So it's a good comparison between the two.
I think it's right. Paul's famous sermon in Acts 17 on Mars Hill. Exactly right. All right. So, professing themselves to be wise. That expression fits a lot of people today, right? A lot of people who deny God. You know, they profess that they're so wise, as we were suggesting earlier. They're the intellectual elites. They profess themselves to be wise, but actually, this is a foolish, entirely foolish position to take. But because they have this inherent desire to worship something, then he talks about idolatry. They changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. There's always been a strong inclination toward idolatry because men have this inclination to worship something. They deny God, although he's very evident, although he's made himself manifest. It's inexcusable to deny God, but they deny God. And so in their foolish minds, then they invent something else to worship. And he's talking about idolatry here, which has been rampant throughout human history, the worship of idols. So that's the foolish. That's what these truth deniers do in their foolish hearts, is they devise something of their own to worship. Tom?
Let's look at that order that Paul puts these things in. It's sort of, he starts with corruptible men, and then birds and four-footed beasts, and then creeping things. It's like they keep lowering their standard of who they're going to worship.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. So you're talking about this: man, birds, four-footed beasts, and then finally creeping things. So it sort of, their standards of things worth worshiping become less and less. I hadn't thought about that. Interesting. Anybody else? Thoughts, comments? Mike?
These things that they make, like these beasts and different things and birds, they have eyes, but they can't see. They have hands, but they don't handle them. They have feet, but they don't walk. And the Lord said, hey, if you make these and bow down to these, you'll be like unto them. Because they can't see, they can't touch, they can't feel. So they'll be like unto them.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, anybody else? All right.
There's a lot of teaching going on right now that your pets will go to heaven.
Yeah. You mean to tell me my pet cat won't be in heaven? That people are pretty much offended by that. But nothing else in creation has an eternal soul. Nothing else in creation, only humans. All right, let's look at these next verses. We probably won't get time to discuss them all, but so you know the kind of people, we've been describing the kind of people under consideration here are those who suppress God's truth, who deny his existence, who have dreamed up even to worship things of their own creation, idolatry. So, what's God's reaction to that? Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up to vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient. And then he's going to go on in the next section to just give a whole list of sins that they engaged in. All right, so wherefore is a connecting word, right? So as we're studying through a text, always look for keys like that, because that word links it to what's just before it. What's just before it is these people who inexcusably deny God, right? And so since they denied God, and then even in their crazy imagination invented idols to worship instead of God, what did God do? Because of that, God gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. All right, so here's God's reaction to what those previously described people do, God gave them up. What's the newer translation? What's the expression there? James, what do you got? Gave them over, okay. God just let them go that way. It's not that... I think this is talking about just what happens when you deny God. God let them go that way. He didn't put anything on them that they didn't bring upon themselves. I think that's what God just gave them over or gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their hearts. Notice he's going to give some detail here who dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Now he's going to be more specific about that in just a minute. But God just let them go. God let them go that way. God gave them over to do the things that they imagine in their own mind. Now, I think verse 25 is sort of parenthetical. Who are we talking about here? Who are we talking about that God gave up, that God gave over to uncleanness, to dishonor their bodies among themselves? Who are we talking about? Well, we're talking about those who changed the truth of God to a lie, who worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator. So that's the people he was just describing, right? So kind of view verse 25 is sort of a parenthetical link. He described those people, and he says God gave them up, let them go that way. But just for clarity, he identified who he's talking about there in verse 25. He's talking about these people who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshiped and served the creature. That's that idolatrous worship that he was describing, don't you think, just in the previous verses? So he gave up. These are the people that he gave up. So 24 says he gave them up. 25 just clarifies who we're talking about here. We're talking about those people that were just described. All right, so what's the outcome then? For this cause God gave them up to vile affection. You know this passage, right? We've used this passage plenty. There's not a plainer description of homosexuality anywhere in the Bible than right here. I mean, there's lots of descriptions. What do you think? I'm always hesitant to try and categorize things how God feels about different things. Does God hate stealing more than lying? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I would draw that distinction. Does God hate homosexuality more than other sins? Well, I'm really hesitant to make that distinction. Right? I don't think that's fair. But I'm going to tell you, God hates homosexuality. I don't know that you can say he hates it more than anything else, but I'm going to tell you it's clear that he hates it. God hates homosexuality. And that's been true all through the ages, right? I mean, you go back to the patriarchal age, Sodom and Gomorrah. Bring it under the Mosaic age, specific laws against homosexuality. And a statement like this in the New Testament, God hates homosexuality. I'm very hesitant to say he hates that one sin more than other, but I know he hates this sin. Matt?
I think it's pretty obvious that there are some things that God feels more strongly about than others, and homosexual being one of them. And I think this verse here explains why in my mind sin is sin. I mean, sin is sin, but there are those who are going to sin and defy God, and that's sin. But this carries it to another level, because not only is it sin, but God put nature in order. Yeah. And there's an order to things, and they're even going against that. Yeah. They don't only just deny God, they're denying the very nature in which things are set in order, and they're going outside of that.
Yeah. Well said. I think that's a very good description. Exactly right. Mike?
God sees things way different than we do.
Yeah.
Those things that are highly esteemed among men is an abomination with God.
Yeah.
It's just like this World Series that just ended. They hold that in high esteem. If you ever watched that at the end, They put that in the high esteem, but you know how the Lord looks at all that? With abomination. So God sees things way different than what we do.
I think that's a point we've got to always keep in mind, is that we need to see things as God sees them, not as man sees them.
Well, even a proud look is an abomination to the Lord.
Yeah.
A proud
Yeah.
look.
Wade? Yeah, Wade.
The psalmist says in Psalm 115, "Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name give glory because of your loving kindness, because of your truth. Why should the nations say, where now is their God? But our God is in the heavens. He does whatever he pleases. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of man's hands. They have mouths but cannot speak. They have eyes but they cannot see. They have ears but they cannot hear. They have noses but they cannot smell. They have hands but they cannot feel. They have feet but they cannot walk. They cannot make a sound with their throat. Those who make them will become like them, everyone who trusts in them."
Perfect description of the idolatry, isn't it? Yeah.
He said, "Those who make them will become like them."
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Tom?
You know, just that first verse of verse 24 was, he gave them up. You know, God basically is talking about free will in that aspect. He could have stopped it. He could have said, "No, you're not going to do that. I'm not going to let you do that."
I'll destroy you before I let you do that.
Right. So, you know, but he did. He allowed them to go through and pursue those things that they sought to
He
pursue.
gave them over to it.
And in doing so, they turned further away from it.
Good point. Good. I think that's a really good observation. Kelly?
I was going to ask the same, but explain what God also gave them up to.
Yeah. And I think another version says gave them over to. He let, and so I think it's sort of, as Tom was describing, he let them go that way. He could have stopped them. He could have destroyed them on the spot. But he decided, he let them go that way. I think Titus 2:11 says the grace of God that brings salvation hath appeared to all men. So all men can have God's grace. They refuse it. And God lets them. In other words, God, one of the enduring principles of God's dealing with man is free moral agency. You can do what you want to do. God is not going to make you do anything. You have to choose to do what you do. And I think that's the idea here, is more the idea that he gave them over, he let them go that way. He could have stopped them, he could have prevented it, he could have destroyed them, instantaneously. But he let them go and pursue vile affections. We're not supposed to use strong terminology against sin, and specifically the sin. We'll have to talk more about this next week. But specifically, the sin under consideration here is clearly homosexuality, right? But although in political correctness, you're not supposed to speak so plainly. This is pretty plain. These things are vile, and God regards them as such. And so we'll pick up our study there next week, right about verse 27. We don't want to be too graphic here, but this is pretty graphic, right? As we describe the sin of homosexuality. Thanks, everybody.